still a bottleneck for migration. For example, 500 million birds migrate through Palestine on annual migrations from Eurasia to Africa, back and forth.
You are listening to Urban Wildlife Podcast.
Welcome back to another episode of the Urban Wildlife Podcast. This is one of your co-hosts, Billy Brown, with
Tony Crosdale.
On this episode, we're going to hear interviews about wildlife and what it's like to be someone who's into wildlife and some wildlife programming in Palestine. Last year, I was on a kick researching about sort of war and urban wildlife activity, let's say, or urban wildlife observations. And that's like what we're thinking of as like the final episode of what we're thinking of as this season. Will be us talking about some of that stuff that we researched, or some of that stuff about urban wildlife observation and war, particularly in London during the Blitz and World War II. Also some stuff about Berlin immediately after the war, and some stuff about Hiroshima, of all places. And that got me thinking about places where there have been wars more recently. And that got me thinking about the Gaza Strip. I think Palestine had also been interesting to us because we'd done some stuff on Israeli topics. The Israeli swift story that we talked about in wall lizards, wall swifts, wall dolphins. Swifts nest on the western wall. They also nest in the Church of the Nativity. And I knew from conversations from that swift conservationists and researchers in Israel collaborate with colleagues in Palestine. And that just fundamentally, the flora and fauna and the habitats are the same, but with vastly different socioeconomic situations defined by history, conflict, war, and occupation. So that sort of got us thinking about it and poking around every few months, looking up some more stuff and trying to find someone to talk to us. And it finally came through, and we got a couple great people to interview. In this episode, we're talking with Mazin Kumseyeh of the Palestine Museum of Natural History and Imad Atrash of the Palestine Wildlife Society.
So my name is Mazin Kumseyeh. I'm a professor at Bethlehem and Birzeit universities. Before that, I was a professor in the United States at places like Duke and Yale University. Yes, so this museum was established in Bethlehem with the mission that involves education, conservation, and research. Research actually is what we started with, primarily research about the dangers that affect our environment, human impacts, the settlements, the colonization, the human destruction of the habitats, and so forth. Education in terms of focusing especially on school children and university students to try to get them to understand the value of the environment around them and to basically grow on their own. We provide an environment for their growth here in Bethlehem, and so it helps to produce environmental clubs at schools and universities which work to protect the environment and face the challenges that we face, which we can talk about a little later. But that's basically what we do in terms of the museum. It was started in 2014. The website is palestinenature.org, and people can look at it and understand more about what we do.
So what is the geographic reach of the museum?
So just to put your audience to understand where we are in Bethlehem. Bethlehem is in the occupied Palestine. Palestine was occupied in 1948 with the creation of a state of Israel to change a country that was multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multicultural, and make it into a Jewish state of Israel. We are in the central part of Palestine. What's left of Palestine basically now are ghettos or Bantustans like Gaza, Bethlehem, Ramallah, East Jerusalem, etc. And most Palestinians are refugees or displaced people in countries like Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, etc. because of this disjoining activity and the apartheid system that we are subjected to, we are limited in our outreach efforts and the ability to move even from one ghetto to another, let alone, do what we want to do in terms of environmental conservation. So basically, it's a very difficult political situation, if you want, or a geopolitical situation. But we do get some people visiting us and working with us despite all these obstacles from various parts of the West Bank, like the northern West Bank, and even from inside the Green Line, what is now considered the State of Israel. We do get some visitors. We ourselves cannot travel to those places like Jerusalem or the Galilee because we Palestinians are cooped up in smaller areas, but some people can come and visit us, and they do visit us.
When you're introducing school groups or university clubs to nature and to wildlife, what are the things that they get introduced to? I know that, you've lived in the Northeastern United States and in the Southwest and I guess the South. You're used to seeing squirrels and pigeons and I don't know, robins and all sorts of the things that are the backyard wildlife in those parts of the United States. What is the backyard wildlife like for a young nature lover in Bethlehem?
Well, Bethlehem is part of the Fertile Crescent. It's one of the most rich, biodiverse natural areas in the world for the latitude that we live in. This is the bottleneck, if you want. And it's still a bottleneck for migration. For example, 500 million birds migrate through Palestine on annual migrations from Eurasia to Africa, back and forth. So we have a very rich biodiverse area with a lot of animals, a lot of plants, over 2,500 species of plants, for example, over 110 species of mammals, over 540 species of birds, 110 species of reptiles, etc. So it's a very rich biodiverse area. And we can talk about the threats to this biodiversity, of course, but still there are areas in Bethlehem, for example, that are still very rich in some of these animals and plants, and we even have started developing ecotourism here as a source of income for the local people. And this is what we are trying to do here, is ensure protection of what remains of this beautiful, diverse area, which was diverse in terms of natural history, was diverse also in terms of peoples and cultures and languages and religions. Diversity is strength. Unfortunately, there are people who want to destroy diversity and create all monolithic states, or monolithic cultures, like a Jewish state or a Muslim state or this and that. And this is not stable long term. My background is in mammals. I wrote a book on the mammals of the Holy Land, so I know most about mammals. And more recently, we started publishing on birds and reptiles and others. But let's start with the mammals, since we humans are mammals. We have, of course, small mammals like rodents and bats. We have 23 species of bats. We have also larger mammals, including the ibex, the gazelles, the mountain deer that's in the north. We have even leopards still existing, even though it's very endangered around the Dead Sea. The Syrian leopard. We have the various wildcat species. The desert cat. We have the foxes. 3 species of foxes. The beautiful desert foxes like the fennec, like Negev. We have, of course, mountain fox, which is common vulpus that's present in...
Yep, we got those too.
Yeah. So we do have those kinds of diversities. Just about every mammal that's larger than a rabbit here is endangered. We have an unusual animal called the hyrax. You don't have that there. It's an animal, Procavia. It's from the family Procavidae, which is Hyracoidae. The order is an order of mammals that the closest relatives of them are the elephants. So we do have some unusual things in terms of mammals. In terms of birds, we of course have the very large birds like the birds of prey, like the eagles and the vultures and things like that, which are all endangered. And the smallest bird here is the national bird of Palestine, which is the Palestinian sunbird. It's a beautiful bird. The male is bluish black with a fluorescent color and have orange under tufts. And so it is really an amazing little bird that we chose to be the emblem or the symbol for the museum also. So we do have those kinds of things. And
can you see the bird at does it live around the museum?
Yeah, and it's a bird like the hummingbird. Basically, it feeds on nectar, flowers, etc. It's the smallest, tiniest bird in Palestine.
Part of what we like to do in the podcast is not just talk about the nature in other cities, but to talk about the experiences of people like our listeners, nature lovers in other cities. If someone is used to birding in West Texas, or if someone's used to birding in Raleigh-Durham or New Haven, what would be different about all that if they were in Bethlehem?
Well, I mean, the idea of Zionism from the beginning has been to transform Palestine and make it a Jewish state. The native people, as like the native people in North America, were not taken into account. And in fact, their lives and livelihoods were destroyed, like the massive killing of the bison, for example. Millions of bisons were destroyed. This is the idea of colonialism, is an idea that's contrary to native interests and also to animal and plant interests. So because of this, we have, as native indigenous people, face huge challenges in our livelihood. Palestinian villages have lived in harmony with nature for thousands of years. For example, the oldest continuously inhabited town on earth is Jericho, and for 11,000 years continuously inhabited by people from our ancestors, the Canaanites, going back to the Natufian agricultural period, the first agriculture, as I mentioned earlier. Now, if we look at Jericho, for example, Jericho is in the Jordan Valley. It faces huge challenges. The people have been restricted in the smallest area possible of the Jericho environment. And so as a Palestinian, for example, I am sometimes allowed to get to Jericho, where there's a lot of very interesting bird species. Sometimes I'm not allowed to get there. But even if I am able to get there, I'm restricted to particular areas. I'm not allowed, for example, to come close to the Jordan River. This is basically what we face is a lack of freedom of movement. But there are other challenges that we face. Part of the function of the museum, as I mentioned, is to research these challenges. For example, we studied the effect of the settlements, Israeli colonies built on Palestinian land, whether residential settlements, that's Jewish-only settlements, or industrial Jewish settlements that dump their toxic waste on the Palestinian areas, that produce environmental damage, genotoxicity, for example, for human health, that produces isolation of animal and plant species. Israel is building massive walls now that impact movement of animals, not just people. These walls have already uprooted 1.5 million trees. And so there's a lot of environmental damage which we study, try to document, and try to deal with amelioration, mitigation, things like that.
With all the challenges that people face in Palestine, how do you get people to care about nature?
Indeed, this is a huge challenge, and scientific studies have shown that there's a direct correlation between a country's GDP and economic development and their environmental interests. So rich countries, by definition, care more about the environment than poorer countries or poorer economies. And this is understandable. If people are starving in Somalia or in Gaza, I don't expect them to not hunt a bird, for example, or pick a wild plant and eat it. So it's understandable at some level. So the question is how is really a huge challenge. And this is part of why we created this institute, the Palestine Institute of Biodiversity and Sustainability, and the museum itself, is to think of strategies that would work in developing countries and even developing countries under occupation like us in Palestine, and in other countries where there are stresses due to politics. And we did come up with some ideas, one of them, which is to use permaculture methods to kind of wed environmental conservation to the economy of the people. In other words, if we teach a person, even at a refugee camp here, in Bethlehem we have 3 refugee camps, and we taught some refugees how to grow herbs, for example, on the walls of the refugee camp because they don't have land. So we call it green walls. So the green walls and green roofs idea is an idea to grow vegetables and grow herbs and things like that, enhancing their economy while at the same time educating them about protecting the environment and stuff like that. So they start to make the link between a better economic situation, a little bit of extra income in a desperate situation, basically, with at the same time protecting the environment. But we are still exploring. I'm sure there are many, many ideas that we have not explored.
I know you're about to head to England. You talk a little bit about your trip and where, if listeners in the UK would want to hear more about this, where they could go.
So we would love to cooperate with people. We have a volunteer program. If people want to come and volunteer, we have a guest house for volunteers. They can come. We provide them with food and lodging, and they can stay anywhere between 3 weeks to 3 months if they like in Palestine, learning the culture and the language and whatever they want to learn, and developing their own skills and doing some projects around the garden or around permaculture or around the museum itself. So we welcome volunteerism. I go to trips. I went to the US in July, and now I'm coming to England pretty much to ask people to come and join us and help us. They don't even have to come here if they want to volunteer. They can help us from where they are. Again, our website is palestinenature.org, and there they can find details about how they may help. And it's a lot of fun, by the way. People who come here we have volunteers from everywhere. They learn from each other. We have like 5 volunteers now from England, from Germany, and from Italy and the US, basically. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk to your audience. And as I said, we would love to cooperate. We would love to network. If anybody is interested, info@palestinenature.org, and we would love to network with your audience.
It also struck me as potentially a little more political than we usually get. What do you think of that?
It's hard to say because it's not what we're asking political questions, so not much. More is this. I mean, how you can't really avoid it with this subject. When you have people living in apartheid.
And I did ask a couple questions. I was kind of curious, like, all right, under occupation, what's it like to be a wildlife observer? Like,
yeah, I guess in my mind, like, it's not like, what's your opinion or your of the solution here? It's more just like,
what's your experience?
They're in an occupation, so
yeah.
how's that not?
And I think it's basically, we can't get around it. So one thing we take for granted in Philadelphia is that, like, Tony, if you hear about a bird somewhere, if it's a roseate spoonbill that's flying around the marshes of South Jersey.
I literally did that on Sunday.
And you just did what?
Went to another state and traveled 90 miles without any issue whatsoever.
Exactly. If this episode tackles these things from a political dimension more explicitly, I think implicitly any aspect of human injustice and oppression is going to manifest in those relationships with the environment. You know, whether it's we're talking about, like, for example, also talking about like our real or perceived right to experience nature and belong in natural spaces. So thinking of Tyke's interview with the urban birder we had in our urban birding episode. You listen to that, you'll hear themes that aren't about occupation per se, but are still about how people of color might feel belonging or exclusion in birding specifically, but I'll say natural observation activities. I think of particularly Tony's work. I dabble in this stuff. It's what you do for a living. That when you guys are out there doing urban environmental education efforts with low-income and minority youth in Philadelphia who often can get excluded either by means or by the racial background from sort of the broader environmental movement and wildlife observation, then when you're, when you or Tyke or when Keith Russell or Robin Irisari up in North Philly, when you're on the one hand just like, hey, turning people on to nature, but you're also countering sort of aspects of injustice in the way you're doing it.
Yeah, but you know what? Both of those, that example, and how you're relating it to the interview, kind of brings up. It's weird how we're being political by not avoiding the subject, or just doing the right. If we're going to interview, if we're going to look at urban wildlife, of course we want to include this experience.
Yeah,
and we're not going to dance around the problems there. And the same thing with what I do. I'm just doing what the right thing to do. Like I'm not going out of my way to avoid people who need it. So like but yet it seems like you're like, people act like it's this big charity thing I'm doing, and I'm like, no, this is a good. This is a good job, and for me, this is a great thing for me as well. I'm just not choosing to work with what I perceive as an easier population. Like I'm just like not avoiding it, and it's weird how just not avoiding either a tough subject matter or a community that you may perceive as being harder to work with or be more challenged is political, when it's really just the right thing to do. Well,
yeah, I think in our country that's a lot of how ways the exclusion manifests is in people doing the easier things, and so when you stop just letting yourself get channeled into the easy work, then that in of itself is I think of like a pro-justice kind of activity, even if it's not something you mean it to be. And like I'll be honest, like one of the things I was catching when I was listening to it, when I was interviewing these guys and then listening to them, is even if Mazin is a little bit more head on with the political dimensions of it and the limitations of occupation, it isn't like they're sitting there crying in their beer and like not doing anything. They're out there doing what just comes naturally, I mean, they're both doing environmental education work. They're both doing environmental preservation work. But they're taking school groups, they're taking kids in school groups out looking at wildlife. And Imad Atrash, he didn't talk about it as a political act. He's just, cultivating a network of citizen science wildlife observers. It's just kind of like what any of us would do. They're just doing it there.
Ow! Citizen science!
But in this world, it seems like just doing the minimum seems to be radical anymore.
Imad Atrash, Executive Director of Palestine Wildlife Society, a global ornithologist, Global Counselor of BirdLife International until now, interested in nature conservation I'm leading the nature conservation and environmental education since 1992 in Palestine. Ecotourism licensed guide by the Ministry of Tourism. And I enjoyed my life as a person in nature conservation as my hobby it was in the past. I used to be as a lab technician and assistant at Bethlehem University for 13 years. And I left the university, established a small program called Children for the Protection of Nature in Palestine, and 92 till 2000. And then in 99, 2000, I established with my other colleagues Palestine Wildlife Society, and implementing many activities regarding our strategy as empowering people, nature conservation, helping nature, sites, species, habitat, sustainable environment, and just traveling all over the world, meeting people, learning from their experience in nature conservation, environmental education.
On your website, I was just reading about the lesser kestrel.
We did a good project for lesser kestrel, and now we are trying to do a project of lesser spotted eagle, actually.
Okay, and the kestrel struck me as interesting for the purposes of this podcast because it looks like they nest in old walls and human structures.
Yes. It is mostly in the open area, mostly in West Bank, and no records so far in Gaza. Open areas in Jericho, Jerusalem wilderness, what they call it, Judean desert. And in the old city of Jerusalem, there is, I don't know if you have been there or not. If you know Damascus Gate, this is a cross-border area between East Jerusalem and West Jerusalem. And it's nesting on the roof of the old houses in East and West Jerusalem, actually, in that corner exactly.
Wow.
They call it Musrara. And this is one of the greatest hotspots for lesser kestrel, actually, in Palestine, in Jerusalem, in East and West, and how to connect people by the lesser kestrel. In 2000, when we started our organization, it was a global threatened species because, this is in 2000, because of the management of the threatened species all over the world by BirdLife. Then the number of them now increasing in Europe, like Spain. Now it's quite good number. And Europe. Actually, this is a species where located around the Mediterranean in West and East. So it is a Eurasian, let's say, migration species from Europe coming to Asia, to Africa, and, it's connected area between the three continents, Europe, Asia, and North Africa, as the Mediterranean basin.
What are the kinds of things that someone living in a house with a small garden or something like that might see in a Palestinian city, let's say in Ramallah or Bethlehem or somewhere like that?
And there is, quite good species at the moment. Many of the songbirds around, like greenfinch, now it's resident all year round and breeding, chiffchaff, warblers. Now this year, in like an example, I'm living in Bet Sahor, which is close to Bethlehem. I saw there is many different species breeding at my backyard, like bulbul, like Palestine sunbird, jay, myna, Did I said blackbird? Blackbird.
Sure.
What else? Greenfinch. This is a kind of birds around us, actually. Very good number of Indian reptile. It was also breeding in our area. And this is two species, myna and reptile, was introduced by the Israelis before 1 year, years ago. And now as resident and breeding in our backyards.
Got it. You're someone who's traveled internationally and has some way to compare, some basis to compare what it's like to be a Palestinian nature lover versus somewhere else. What are the challenges of that, and how easy is it to get around to follow species? Also, in terms of conservation work, how does occupation, how do security tensions, how do those kind of things affect the experience of the natural world for Palestinians and conservation work?
Actually, this is a big story of success. When we started our, movement in '92, we call it Children for the Protection of Nature in Palestine. We focused from the beginning on kids. Now, it was, as you know, the peace process started in 1993, and then the little kids and their family, allowed to them to go to the field with me to do some of the natural walking trails. And we bought that time some of the binoculars. In 2000, when the second Intifada, if you are familiar with that, the families start to say about me, I am crazy because that Israeli tanks around us and we are trying to go with the little kids to the field. So I said to them, I hope that God will protect us, but at least we will not sleep, we will go. But at the moment, even there is an incubation, the natural walking trails, it's started in very good and high level at the Palestinian youth level. Bird watching start to have in our Facebook. We have now started from last March when we get the photographers to go to the wild, to Marsaba area to shoot the lesser kestrel. Since that time till now, every day, there is tens of the photos of the birds, nature, flowers, flora and fauna, landscape start to show up in our Facebook from all of our friends from West Bank and Gaza, which we train them. Now, the number of people who's interested in nature photography, let's say, or nature conservation, it is there. It is success story, especially at the moment. We have many different groups going to the nature by themselves and as a group, as individuals and groups, going to the nature to take some photos and document. And 2 years ago, we learned about observation.org, and we established our State of Palestine page. And there is the statistics there. It comes 2 years ago till now, around 23,000 of observation.
Wow.
More than 850 species recorded since that time till now. Wow. Now, the nature conservation start to be clear to our society, but there is, as you know, the black market, it's there behind us, away from our eyes, dealing with the flora and fauna, or especially about the birds, the raptor, and the mammals. We've been, as myself and Palestine Wildlife Society, since '95 till now, with the Palestinian Authority at the education level. We put our nature conservation, environmental education concept in our curricula. We've been a part of the environmental law. We've been as technical and the advisor committee of the biodiversity strategic plan till now, since '95 till now. I'm proud of that because our experience, it's there, and it's appear in all of the publications and documentations in Palestine, and especially in ecotourism. Also, we are so far trained in the last year around 40 tourist guide in ecotourism, with great support from the Ministry of Tourism. We are dealing with the official body like environmental, like Ministry of Education, Agriculture, Environment, Tourism, local governors. You know, we are respectful organization from our official body and other international organizations.
You mentioned that some of the folks that you're training are coming from Gaza, and that that's also a place where you're getting good bird observations. How do things differ in terms of people getting out into nature in Gaza and conservation efforts there versus the West Bank?
I am dealing with the local people in each of the sites. We did implemented a project called IBA, Important Bird Areas in Palestine, in West Bank and Gaza. Now, by Skype, by Viber, by Messenger, by emails, we contact the people in Gaza, and we trained them on observation.org. And now we trained them, and I have a small group, around 10 people, males and females, actually doing some of the very nice records and wildlife survey in Gaza. Now, the people to come over here, there is some of them passed by issued of the permits coming from Gaza to Bethlehem and Ramallah. And I've been with them in the field. I trained some of them, but most of them, they are located in Gaza and they are never went out of Gaza. But okay. For the local people in West Bank, I have trained around 200 youth from 6 different universities.
What is happening in Gaza, which is somewhat more cut off, I guess, to wild patches or parks? For example, we've been reading articles about biodiversity and environmental pressures on Wadi Gaza, and we're just kind of curious from the conservation perspective what you've seen or what your organization has seen.
Wadi Gaza, also by email, I can send you a book, a field guide, where I wrote it in 2003. I did with my team in Gaza since 95 up to 2003, and I published a book about Wadi Gaza. Now, in 2000, the previous Minister of Environment declared Wadi Gaza as a protected area or a nature reserve. Of course, it wasn't any criteria, official and professional criteria to declare it, okay? So the people were afraid of that declaration and start to implement many activities. There is 2 threats to Wadi Gaza, one from the Israelis and one from the Palestinians. One of the Israelis, when the floods and the other sewage water from the Israeli settlements in Sinai or in Negev or West Negev. It's connected to Wadi Gaza, and they throw the sewage water to Wadi Gaza. This is facts, not against the Israeli occupation, but this is a facts there, because I've been in the eastern area of Wadi Gaza, and I saw by myself the sewage water floods coming to Wadi Gaza. The second, it is a dumping site now from the Palestinians. Palestinians, they are sending two things: the sewage water again to Wadi Gaza. Second, their dumps and rubbish to Wadi Gaza. Now, this is, of course, it is a shame on us and every single person here in our region, because according to our wildlife survey, and especially the bird migration, there is around at least 12 global threatened species. They are coming to Wadi Gaza. I don't want to say this is a Ramsar site, but it is a real wetland site, and it should be protected 100% from all over things where damage the site itself. And this is after our project with UNDP on 2000. The Ministry of Environment get from the UNDP also a project around 3.4 millions of US dollar to create this nature reserve. But of course, within all this, challenge and the threats, everything was collapsed from what we were planned. I'm really feel very sad about Wadi Gaza, because it is one of the greatest sites here in Palestine. And there is another issue also, that the quails, as you know, they are migrant from Cyprus, from Italy, and when they come to the shore in Gaza, and especially in autumn time now, they are putting mist nets from Beit Lahia, north of Gaza, down to Rafah. All the 40 kilometer or the 24 for 25 miles, they are putting their mist nets to collect the most important birds, which they are flying in evening time. We have a wildlife corner. It's a wildlife sanctuary, but a very small one, located in Beit Sahor near Bethlehem. We are trying to educate our key people and our kids in nature conservation and animal welfare, actually.
Okay.
Yes, and this is as exchange program. If you are interested, or if there is some availability for this ideas, we are so glad and happy to start this cooperation.
Thank you very much for talking.
That's good, very good. Thank you for the invitation also to talk to you.
Lesser kestrels. That's something that came up when Robin was talking about Rome. I don't think you saw some, but you were asking about them
too. Yeah.
Was that the Colosseum you were asking about them?
Yeah, but the regular are the Eurasian kestrel also nest in man-made structures too.
Yeah. So
there's actually a documentary about one, I think, nesting in Sweden. It's really Church Tower, Sweden. It's really cool.
Okay, but both of them, in any case. But this is one of the fun dimensions of the Swift story we did. We're looking at swifts in the Western Wall. When you're talking about birds nesting in old human structures in Palestine and in Israel, we're talking about some of the longest inhabited places on Earth. I mean, Jericho, he mentions, and sort of the walls around Jerusalem. I mean, so you've got these birds that have likely been nesting on old walls for the past, who knows, 3,500 years.
Yeah. There's a pretty good Bangkok walls in Jericho.
A pretty good what?
Like a punky hardcore band called Walls of Jericho.
I feel like it's not an episode if you haven't managed to
Of course not.
to connect something we've said to a hardcore band name. So that's pretty much the episode. We hope you like it. I want to find some people actually in Gaza to talk to. I've reached out. I haven't got anyone to write me back. So if you know anybody in Gaza and wants to talk about the wildlife they check out there, let me know. There's one author who keeps popping up, Abdel Fattah and Abed Rabu. I'm probably mangling that name horribly. But this guy churns out wildlife articles from Gaza, and he's at the Islamic University of Gaza Department of Biology. And then I sort of stalked him on Facebook and found a neat little thing he was posting on Facebook about one of his students' work doing plant surveys in old cemeteries in Gaza. As soon as I saw that, I was like, old cemeteries.
Yeah.
We love old cemeteries. So thank you again for listening to another episode of the Urban Wildlife Podcast. If you like the episode, what should you do, Tony?
You should like us. You should give us a review, preferably a good one.
That's right.
You should tweet about us. You should tell your friends. You should contact us and holler at us and tell us what you like, what you didn't like. We love corresponding with our listeners. If you study urban wildlife in any capacity, we will interview you for the podcast.
Pretty much.
There's no way we wouldn't, right?
Yeah.
So just get in touch.
So again, thanks for listening. Thanks to Mazin Kumsiya and Imad Atrash for talking with us. Mazin is going to be traveling in the UK and talking over there, so keep an eye out for his appearances in the United Kingdom. If you're making it to Israel or to Palestine, make sure you stop by the Palestine Natural History Museum or stop by the Wildlife Society. Find yourself an eco guide and go check out some nature over there. Thanks.
Thank you.
I've been in Bethlehem actually, eating our lunch when we visited the Hook Mountain Sanctuary.
Wait, you've been to Bethlehem in Pennsylvania?
Yes, I've been having lunch there.
That's where my wife is from. She grew up this is one of the funny things when I've been doing this research in the Palestinian stuff is we've been joking, I'm reading about the original Bethlehem, and she's from the Pennsylvania Bethlehem.
Yeah, and Philadelphia, one of the quiet places which I like it. I saw Philadelphia once in autumn. With many multi-colors of the trees.
Yes.
Unbelievable view in my life. That's view of Philadelphia trees when it was in autumn.